You know, I appreciate the reputation I have these days. I explain the lore and I keep Riot's MMO alive. I should be getting paid for this. But I do have to disappoint you, because as you can see, this video is not gonna have 30 minutes. But that's not because I couldn't do it. I could explain the entire history of the Darkin and everything that is connected to this. But I wanna save that for the end of the year, which is when we are going to explain the story of everything that happened in 2025. Anyway, it seems like once again League of Legends pumped out a new cinematic. At least they call it a cinematic, but everyone can agree it kinda feels more like a teaser. And that's because, technically, this cinematic is on the same level as the one that bridged the Noxian season and the Spirit Blossom season. You know, it's the short one, where LeBlanc and Vladimir were talking about the glaive. And if Riot decides to do the exact same thing, then that means that this is not our final cinematic. It is likely we are gonna get more as we roll further into Season 3. But if you look into the description of the cinematic, you can notice that not only does Season 3 in League of Legends start tomorrow, but also you can see that this cinematic was made by Fortiche once again. So expect a lot of artistic stylization as well as a lot of attention to detail. In fact, that's why we are here. So let's dive into the beginning of the end, the Trials of Twilight. Now, before we even begin with the cinematic, yes, I understand that on frame 0 it is funny to already talk about lore, but the reason why this cinematic is called Trials of Twilight is because Twilight has always been related to the Darkin. First of all, it is the aspect of Twilight that sealed the first Darkin back in Shurima. And it is the same aspect of Twilight who taught mortals how to seal the Darkin inside their own weapons. Also, the story in which all of this was described was called the Twilight of the Gods. So in general, Twilight and the celestial magic are linked to the story of the Darkin. And so now we can start with the first frames. The cinematic immediately starts with a room full of details. Yes, I know that this may look like a tree to you, but hang on. The tree symbolism has been around ever since Yunara's story was introduced in Season 2. A super quick catching up on the story. During the times of ancient Ionia, as the Darkin were rampaging around the world, Yunara was tasked with protecting the Temple of Koshin, which is where one of the Darkin were hidden. The plot twist being that this Darkin, whom is also sometimes referred to as the Patron, didn't necessarily seem like a bad guy. Also, they looked far more celestial than Darkin, and this could be because this Darkin possibly avoided the blood corruption that came from Zolani, which is what turned the Ascended into the bloody twisted monstrosities. Or it could be because the Temple of Koshin had special magic that could suppress the Darkin. This is also being teased through the new upcoming skin for Xin Zhao. We talked about that entire thing last time. In short, Yunara should have some kind of Darkin cleansing ability somewhere. Anyway, the point is, not only was the Patron good enough to help Yunara fight all the other Darkin, but whenever Yunara communed with him, in the myths, the Darkin was always portrayed almost as a tree. This was also true in the original concept art for Yunara. But again, all of that is what the Darkin looks like in the myths that are passed down through generations. So in reality, as is shown here, the Darkin is just in a tree. In fact, if we zoom in, there he is. That is most likely the glaive in which the Darkin is sealed. What's even cooler is that you can see how the pommel, or the head, we're not sure which part that is, resembles the shape from the myths. Now, if you are asking why the glaive is stuck in a tree, well, the reasons could be many. Maybe it was just Fortiche's artistic decision, but there could also be a lot of lore behind this. Maybe this is a seedling of Omikayalan, the god willow of Ionia, which was a magical tree that would definitely have the power to suppress a Darkin. Or perhaps this is a branch of the Dreaming Tree, which was a child of Omikayalan, which is also the tree that is linked to all the dreams across Runeterra. If that's the case, then perhaps the tree was used to keep the Darkin sleeping? But more importantly, this is why the entire theme of the season could be dreams and nightmares. But enough talking about the tree. Another cool thing here is the room itself. First of all, it does kinda resemble the Temple of Pallas, which is where Varus was sealed, whom of course is a fellow Darkin. But more importantly, this place should be inside the temple which Yunara was protecting. This is the same temple that could be seen in the background everywhere this season. In fact, at the end of Xin Zhao's minigame, we could see Atakan just zipping past us in the background, and we learned that Yunara's temple was breached. It is not too hard to put 2 and 2 together and realize that LeBlanc indeed infiltrated the place. And that is why, in the following seconds, the goop comes in. Now, what's cool to see here is that throughout all the cinematics, Riot made sure that we connect the goop to Atakan. I mean, we all remember how Atakan gooped on LeBlanc's face. The point of that scene was to actually make you remember that the goop is connected to him. And let me tell you, I guess that scene succeeded. And as the goop rushes in, we get to our first vision. It starts with a shot of the ooze splattered across the ground, and as the camera goes up, we get to see a silverwing raptor impaled on a grey stone. Which means this is definitely the vision of the fall of Demacia. Interestingly enough though, you can see that the silverwing, as well as parts of the ground, are pierced with what seems to be bolts of petrified steel. These could be potentially linked to the crossbows of the Demacian demon hunters, or they could come out of the Demacian ballistas, which would potentially normally be used against the dragons surrounding the nation. But here we can see that these weapons were used against their own people, which is our first clue that there was an entity that caused people to fight each other. Spoiler alert, that's what the Darkin have always done. They formed their own war hosts of mortals who worship them like gods. In fact, that was also teased in Yunara's lore. I mean, the Darkin wars were literally just mortals worshipping the Darkin fighting each other. Anyway, then, as we zoom in a little bit further, we get covered in the feathers of the Silverwing, and again we can see it died from the bolts. After which we get into some really blurry visions, but if we pause at just the right moments, we can see all the blue Demacian banners, and we can also see the classic petrified steel spears. Yes, one of these was also wielded by Xin Zhao, but more importantly, this is teasing that we are in the capital of Demacia. The peculiar thing here is that there are no signs of anything but Demacian weapons and armor. So again, it is likely that some of these Demacians fought each other. But what's even more peculiar is that all of the armor is empty. Outside of like 2 bodies found in the background, most of these are piles of metal. But after that, we get a shot of the Demacian crown falling from the stairs. At which point, some of you may say, that doesn't look like the crown of Jarvan. And that's because I don't think that's what this is supposed to resemble. The King of Demacia essentially has 2 headpieces. They have the normal crown, which is what this likely is, but then there is also the dragon slaying armor, which has a similar but slightly different headpiece. That one is only supposed to look like the crown. In fact, Arcane already showed us their own rendition of that headpiece. So this is likely the ceremonial crown. As to why do we see it falling here, we'll see in a moment. First, the shot suddenly goes back to the tree, which is being covered in goop, after which we go back to Demacia and we can see 2 Darkin standing in the throne room. Of course, we know that these are the skins for Garen and Jarvan. And let me tell you, I really wish those skins had the colors shown in the cinematic. Anyway, this is where we have to mention the fact that these are likely visions that were given to Xin Zhao, with the one causing all of this, of course, being Atakan, driven by LeBlanc. So this is not real. But Xin Zhao, as well as us technically, doesn't know if this is a vision of the future or if it is a nightmare that is supposed to push Xin Zhao into doing something. And because we are talking about LeBlanc here, I think that's what's happening. LeBlanc is likely giving Xin Zhao these visions to manipulate him. Specifically, since at the end of their stories, Xin Zhao and Yunara were traveling towards the patron, I think LeBlanc wants to give Xin a hatred towards the Darkin, so that once they get there, he would want to destroy the patron. Or possibly, just like Yunara teamed up with him before, he might want to wield the patron's glaive to destroy the other Darkin. Remember, throughout this entire year, it was teased that LeBlanc wants Xin Zhao to be her host for the Darkin, which means she wants him to pick up the glaive. And these visions definitely seem like a way for her to achieve that. And so, the reason why we can see Darkin corrupted Garen and Jarvan and the crown here is because Xin Zhao was always like an uncle to Jarvan IV. He taught him everything from combat to meditation. So to see a Darkin twist someone so close to him would be traumatizing. When it comes to Garen, well, Garen was always one of the leaders of the Dauntless Vanguard. So the chances are the two interacted before a lot, but none of the stories really gave us any details. So let's just assume the two are close. But more importantly, since this story is technically happening before the story of the Mageseeker Rebellion, it means that King Jarvan III is still alive. On top of this, Xin Zhao swore on his life to keep him alive. So should the king die, he would technically break his oath. That's why we can see the crown shatter on the black goop. It is Atakan's nightmare specifically targeting Xin Zhao's past. After which, something unexpected happened. It is not Xin's hand that picks up the glaive, but instead it is Atakan. And of course, all of this is related to what we've seen on PBE. There we could see that Atakan's hand became a Darkin weapon, meaning that LeBlanc achieved something insane. She successfully combined a demon and a Darkin. I am not sure if we've seen a more powerful abomination in the lore, because normally when a Darkin is picked up by someone else, it is usually a mortal human being, not a powerful demon. Which, by the way, could be also why all the piles of armor are empty in that scene. A lot of the Darkin simply use blood magic to consume the mortals to improve their bodies. So maybe that's what's happening here. Anyway, after this, we get a couple of creepy zoom-ins on the eyes of Garen and Jarvan. I don't think there is supposed to be any big symbolism here. However, notice that the shape of their eyes is kinda close to LeBlanc in her weird shadowy form, which again could be teasing that all of this is the result of LeBlanc. But then, in one of the final shots, we zoom out and we can see a totally empty throne room of Demacia. Specifically, this is what the room is normally supposed to look like. Now here, what's most important is that Atakan is looming over the throne. Now, if you connect everything that happened here, previously we saw Atakan grab onto the glaive above the tree. So perhaps the vision that is being given to Xin Zhao turned the room with the tree and the Darkin into the Demacian throne room in his head. Again, maybe that's what's gonna trigger Xin Zhao into fighting all the other people present. But then in the fake Demacian throne room, in the background we can see one of the heads of the Colossi, which could be just a Demacian statue, but in the Mageseeker game we learned that the Mageseekers did some crazy experiments with this and they turned them into animated weapons. So this could be a cool reference to the Mageseeker game. Then of course there is Garen and Jarvan in the front. Again, they are likely here to spark Xin Zhao's hatred towards the Darkin. And finally, a subtle detail is that you can see LeBlanc's eyes hovering over the entire scene, teasing that she's been behind all of this from the very beginning. And that is when Yasuo wakes up. Which is what a lot of people thought for some reason. But nope, of course, this is not Yasuo. He's clean shaved. And yes, this is Fortitia's rendition of Xin Zhao himself. Which is where it was revealed that all of this was a vision or a nightmare that was caused by LeBlanc. But more importantly for us, this is a teaser for what is to come in Season 3. And I mean, we do already have some hints as to what's gonna be happening. We did get a mission image where we saw that Xin Zhao is likely gonna fight Atakan, as should be obvious by now, but that's kinda all we got for now. And so once again, we got an amazing cinematic, which is continuing Riot's great streak of handling the lore. Yes, after quite a bit of a downfall, the lore is resolving in a really cool way now. And I hope Riot sticks to this format, and I hope they stick with Fortiche. Because so far, Fortiche has been delivering nothing but bangers, and more importantly, they managed to fix Riot's biggest flaw. Somehow, they actually beat the same face syndrome.